I need to check the names to avoid, then write the story. The band names are Henry, Marcus, Cheryl, Raymond, Walter, Loretta, Darnell, Theodore, Franklin, Claire, Beverly, Kyle, Nathan, Priya, Sherald. I'll use fresh names. The narrator is Uncle Elwood, but wait. Channel is Voices of Uncle Henry, so the narrator persona is Uncle Henry, but Henry is banned from character names in the story itself. The channel name uses Henry as a brand, but the story characters need different names. I'll name the narrator / Uncle Elwood, niece Simone, abusive husband Darren, mother-in-law Patricia, brother-in-law Troy. The day my niece called me, she wasn't even crying. That was the part that scared me most. Simone has always been the kind of woman who cries at commercials, the ones with dogs coming home, the ones with soldiers surprising their kids at school. She cried at my retirement party when I gave a 10-minute speech about nothing, but that Tuesday afternoon in March, when she called me from a Walgreens parking lot in Decatur, Georgia, her voice was so flat it didn't even sound like her. "Uncle Elwood," she said, "I just needed to hear somebody's voice." I was sitting in my recliner watching the evening news. I muted it. "I'm right here, baby." "What's going on?" She paused for a long time. Long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "Nothing," she said. "Never mind, I'm okay." She wasn't okay. I knew it, and she knew I knew it. But Simone had been trained, and I do mean trained, the way you train a dog not to bark, to say she was fine when she wasn't. She'd been saying it for 3 years. 3 years of, "I'm okay and things are better now," and Darren's been really trying lately. 3 years of me sitting in this same recliner, muting this same television, feeling something cold move through my chest every time I heard her voice. I'm 63 years old. I spent 22 years working as an investigator for the Georgia Department of Labor, looking into fraudulent claims, workplace violations, situations where somebody was being taken advantage of and the paperwork had been doctored to make it look clean. I know what a cover story sounds like. I know what a person sounds like when they've rehearsed what they're about to say to you. Simone had been rehearsing for 3 years. Her mother, my younger sister Odette, passed away from breast cancer in 2019. Simone was 26. She had just married Darren the year before, and at the time I thought he was a decent enough man. Quiet. Worked in logistics for a distribution company out in Conyers. He wore iron shirts to Sunday dinner and called me sir the first few times we met. I didn't love him, but I didn't have a reason to dislike him either. Odette liked him well enough, though looking back now, I think Odette was just relieved her daughter had somebody steady. Odette was already sick by then. She wanted Simone to be taken care of. The problem is, there's a difference between being taken care of and being controlled. It just takes a while to see it from the outside. The first sign I noticed was small. About 6 months after Odette passed, Simone stopped coming to family cookouts alone. Darren was always with her. That's not unusual. She was married. But when she came, she'd check in with him before she answered simple questions. Someone would ask her if she wanted more potato salad, and she'd glance at Darren first. Just a quick look, the kind of look you make when you're not sure what answer is the right answer. I filed that away. The second sign was the phone calls dropping off. We used to talk every Sunday. Then it became every other Sunday. Then it became her texting me instead. Short messages, always cheerful, always with an emoji that felt like it was doing the work her voice didn't want to do. I filed that away too. The third sign was a photograph her cousin posted on Facebook, Christmas 2021. In the photo, Simone is smiling. But it's the kind of smile that stops at the mouth. Her eyes look like somebody turned the lights down. I stared at that photo for a long time. After that Tuesday call from the Walgreens parking lot, I didn't wait anymore. I got in my car and drove to Decatur. She opened the door in a way that told me she'd been expecting someone else. There was a flinch, just half a second, and then she recognized me and her face did something complicated, like relief and panic arriving at the same moment. "Uncle Elwood, you didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to," I said. "Where is he?" "He's at work. He doesn't get home until 7. I looked at my watch. It was 4:15. I had time. I went inside. The house was neat in the way that houses are neat when someone is always watching, always checking. Not the comfortable kind of neat, where things have a place because that's where people put them, but the rigid kind, where everything is positioned just so because moving it has consequences. Simone made coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table, and I let her talk at her own pace. It took about 40 minutes of surface conversation before the real thing came out, and when it did, it came out in pieces, the way things do when someone has been holding them for a long time. Darren had a system. That's the word I kept coming back to as she talked. A system. It wasn't random anger. It wasn't just a temper. It was a set of rules she was supposed to follow, and when she didn't follow them, when she spent too long on the phone, when she bought something without telling him, when she drove somewhere he didn't know about, when she said something at dinner that he thought was too familiar with another man, there were consequences. Sometimes the consequences were words. Long, cold, methodical words delivered in a low voice while she stood in the kitchen after everyone else had gone to bed. A recitation of every mistake she'd ever made, every flaw she carried, every way she was lucky he was still there. Sometimes it was worse than words. She had a bruise on her left forearm that she told her co-workers she got from bumping into a cabinet. She showed it to me without me asking, just rolled up her sleeve and showed me like she'd been waiting for somebody to finally make it real by seeing it. I didn't say anything for a moment, I just looked at it. Then I asked her about his family. This is the part I want you to understand, because it matters. Darren did not operate alone. That is something people miss when they look at a situation like this from the outside. They see one man, one abuser, one problem. But Darren had backup. He had his mother, Patricia, who lived 40 minutes away in Stockbridge, and called the house 3 times a day and had, over 3 years, systematically dismantled every friendship and family connection Simone had ever built. Patricia was the one who told Darren when Simone had been somewhere she hadn't mentioned. Patricia was the one who called me, twice, in the first year, to tell me, very politely, that Simone needed space to adjust to married life, and that I was inserting myself too much as her uncle. I remember being confused by those calls. I remember thinking, Patricia seemed like a concerned mother-in-law who maybe just had strong opinions. I understand now that those calls were strategic. And then there was Darren's younger brother, Troy. Troy was 29, unemployed in the way that some men are unemployed for long stretches without anyone in their family seeming bothered by it. And he spent a significant amount of time at Darren and Simone's house. Enough time that Simone had stopped inviting friends over because she never knew when Troy would be there, sitting in the living room, watching. 3 of them. One system. I sat in that kitchen for 2 hours and 30 minutes. When I left, I hugged Simone at the door and I told her I loved her. And I told her that whatever she decided to do, she was not alone. On the drive home, I called my daughter Renee, who is an attorney in Atlanta. Not a family law attorney, she does corporate contracts, but she knows people. I told her I needed a referral to a good family violence legal advocate, someone who worked with women in Simone's situation. Renee had someone for me within an hour. Then I called my old colleague from the Labor Department, a man named Booth, who now does private investigation work. I asked him to quietly start documenting what he could about Darren's finances, his property holdings, anything that Simone's attorney would need. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. Because when I tell this part of the story, people assume I was operating on emotion. I was not. I was operating on 22 years of professional experience and 6 decades of knowing what it costs when you let a thing like this go on too long. I was deliberate. I was careful. And I was absolutely certain about what I was going to do. The plan came together over 4 weeks. The legal advocate Renee connected Simone with was a woman who had spent 15 years helping women in exactly this situation navigate the legal and logistical realities of leaving safely. She met with Simone twice, at locations Darren didn't know about, and she was very clear leaving had to be done in a specific order. Safety first. Documentation second. Exit third. Simone's name was not on the mortgage. Darren had positioned it that way early in the marriage, framed it as a tax benefit, and Simone had trusted him. But she had 2 joint bank accounts and a car in her name, and she had 4 years of paychecks from her job as an office manager at a pediatric clinic. Darren had pushed her to work, actually, because a working wife looked normal from the outside, and her income went into a joint account he monitored. She had almost nothing that was purely hers. The advocate helped her open a new bank account at a different institution, one Darren had no connection to. Her next direct deposit would go there. In the meantime, I handled something else. Patricia called me. It had been probably 18 months since the last time we spoke, and when I saw her name on my phone, I almost didn't answer. But I answered. She was friendly. That's the thing about Patricia. She was always friendly on the surface, which made what she was actually saying harder to hear clearly if you weren't paying attention. She told me she'd heard I'd come by to see Simone, and she wanted to let me know. Gently, she said, out of respect for our families, that Simone was going through a difficult time emotionally, and that outside influences, however well-intentioned, could make things harder. Outside influences, I said. Family can sometimes make a troubled woman feel like she has to perform a crisis, Patricia said. I let that sit for a moment. Then I told Patricia that I appreciated her calling, and that I would keep her perspective in mind. I hung up and wrote down, word for word, everything she had said. I sent it to Renee and to Simone's advocate. What happened next happened on a Saturday. Darren had a habit of going to his buddy's place in Lithonia on Saturday afternoons to watch college football. He usually left around noon and was back by 7 or 8. Simone had learned years ago not to make plans for Saturday evenings because he expected dinner when he got home, and she'd learned not to be on the phone when he walked in because he'd want to know who she was talking to. That particular Saturday she had plans. Her co-worker, a woman she trusted, came by that afternoon with her truck. Simone's most important things. Documents, some clothes, her grandmother's jewelry, a photograph of her mother, were packed and ready in bags she'd stored in the back of her own car. The co-worker loaded them. Simone drove her own car to a storage unit in a different county that the advocate had helped her set up. Then her co-worker drove her to a hotel. She called me from the hotel room. I'm out, she said, and this time she was crying. The real kind of crying. The kind that comes when you've been holding your breath for so long that when you finally breathe, it overwhelms you. I know, I said. I know, baby. I'm proud of you. We talked for a while. I told her she didn't have to rush anything. I told her Renee's contact was ready to file for a protective order on Monday morning. I told her that her job had already been notified, quietly, by Simone herself, and that they had a safety plan in place. And then I told her of the other thing I'd arranged. I need to back up, because I left something out. 3 weeks before Simone left the house, Darren came to see me. I don't know if Patricia told him about my visit or if Simone said something, I believe it was Patricia, based on the timeline. But he showed up at my house on a weekday evening unannounced, which told me right away this was not a social call. Darren was a man who believed that shelling up unannounced gave him an advantage. He used surprise as a tool. I answered the door in my work clothes. I'd been out in the garage, and I watched him register that I was bigger than he remembered, or maybe he'd never looked at me that carefully before. I'm 6'2", and I spent my working years walking job sites and warehouses. I am not a small man. He came in. I offered him water. We sat in the living room and he told me, in a very reasonable tone, that he was worried about Simone's mental health, that she'd been struggling since her mother's death, that she sometimes had episodes where she imagined things that weren't happening, and that he was doing his best to support her, but outside interference was making her worse. Interference, I said. You coming by without calling, he said. It unsettles her. I nodded slowly. I appreciate you explaining that to me. He relaxed a little, just slightly, but I've spent 22 years watching people relax when they think they've succeeded. She showed me her arm, I said. The relaxing stopped. She bruised it on the cabinet She showed it to me, I said again, and she told me how it happened. He looked at me for a long moment. Then something shifted in his face. Not guilt, not remorse. Just a kind of recalculation. Like a man who'd been playing chess and just realized the board looked different than he thought. I think there are two sides to every. Darren, I said, I need you to hear me very clearly right now. I am not her parent. I'm not her counselor. I am a 63-year-old man who promised my sister on her deathbed that I would look after her daughter. That is the only thing I am. And I need you to understand that there is nothing you can say to me in this living room that will change what I already know. He stood up. This family, he said, and his voice had dropped, gotten tight, needs to stay out of what it doesn't understand. I understand plenty, I said. He left. 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Troy, Darren's younger brother, telling me that I should be careful about making enemies, that Darren was a man who didn't forget things, that I was an old man sticking my nose into something that didn't concern me. I recorded that call. I sent the recording to Renee and to Simone's advocate. What I'm about to tell you now is the part that I don't regret, but I also don't tell to just anyone. The night Simone left, Darren came home and found an empty house. He called her phone. She didn't answer. She'd been told not to. He drove around looking for her. He called Patricia and Troy. He showed up at her co-worker's apartment and pounded on the door. The co-worker didn't answer and called the police, which created a documented incident report that Simone's attorney used later. He was unraveling. Sunday morning, Darren called me. This is where I want you to understand what happened because it matters. He did not call me in the quiet, reasonable voice he'd used in my living room. He called me loud and unsteady. He told me he knew I was involved. He told me I had helped steal his wife. He told me I was a meddling old man who didn't know what he was dealing with. And in that phone call, not knowing I was recording it, Darren said things about what he would do when he found Simone. Specific things that made every single one of those words prosecutable. His attorney, when he later saw the recording, had very little to say. The protective order was granted Monday morning. The filing included the recording from Troy's call, the recording from Darren's Sunday call, the advocate's documentation from Simone's sessions, photographs of the bruising on her arm that the advocate had helped her take and timestamp properly, and a financial disclosure showing the pattern of economic control over 3 years. Darren hired a lawyer who told him to take the situation seriously. He did not take it seriously. He violated the protective order twice in the first week, driving past Simone's new apartment complex and sitting in the parking lot, which was caught on the complex's security cameras both times. The judge was not lenient. Patricia called me again after the second violation. She was less friendly this time. She told me I had destroyed her son's life. She told me I had taken a family and torn it apart for nothing. She told me Simone would regret this. I let her finish. Then I told her that her son had made every choice he made on his own, that nobody in a court had put words in his mouth on a recorded phone call, that nobody had forced him to sit in a parking lot outside his wife's apartment building at 11 o'clock at night, that I had done exactly one thing in this situation, which was show up for my niece the way her mother would have wanted me to. Patricia hung up. That was 14 months ago. Simone's divorce was finalized in October. She's living in a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood in Decatur that she picked herself. She told me that was important to her, that she'd never lived anywhere she'd chosen on her own, not since her 20s. She's got a small balcony and she put plants out there, and she sends me pictures of them sometimes. She got a promotion at the clinic. She's going to see a therapist, a good one she found herself, one she pays for with money from her own account. She called me last Sunday, just to talk, not from a Walgreens parking lot, not because she needed to hear a voice, just to catch up, to tell me about the plants and the promotion and a book she'd been reading. We talked for an hour. At one point she said, "Uncle Elwood, I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come." I told her the truth, which is that she would have found her way. It might have taken longer. It might have been harder. But the strength was always hers. I just helped her see it. That's what I keep coming back to when I think about this. People ask me if I regret confronting Darren the way I did, if I regret getting involved, if I worry about whether it was my place, and the answer is no. I don't regret a single moment of it, because I remember sitting in that recliner watching the news, muting the television when the phone rang, feeling that cold thing move through my chest every time she said she was fine. And I remember what my sister looked like in the last months of her life when she made me promise. She didn't say it in dramatic terms. She didn't make a big speech. She was tired and she was quiet, and she took my hand and she said, "Elwood, just keep an eye on her. That's all I'm asking." I kept my eye on her, and when she needed more than an eye, when she needed someone to walk through a door and sit at a kitchen table and listen until the real thing came out, I did that too. My sister raised a strong woman who had been systematically convinced over years that she was fragile. All I did was show up long enough for her to remember who she actually was. The plants on the balcony are doing well, by the way. She sent me a picture this morning. There's a fern and 2 succulents and something with small white flowers that she told me the name of, and I immediately forgot. I think Odette would have loved that balcony. I think she would have loved seeing her daughter out there, watering her plants, choosing her own things, living in a place she picked for herself. I know I do. I've been thinking a lot about cause and effects lately. Not in any grand philosophical way, just the plain practical version of it that you start to notice clearly after 6 decades of watching people make choices and then live inside the consequences of those choices. Darren made choices every single day. For 3 years he made choices. He chose to speak to Simone in a low voice after midnight when nobody was around to hear. He chose to position his name on the mortgage and keep hers off. He chose to call me, a 63-year-old man with 22 years of investigative experience, and say things on a recorded phone call that no attorney in the state of Georgia could walk back. Those were all his choices, every one of them. And Patricia made choices too. She chose to call me twice in that first year to discourage me from staying close to my niece. She chose words like outside influences and performing a crisis. Careful, strategic words designed to make me feel like the problem. What she didn't account for is that I spent 2 decades of my professional life listening to people use careful, strategic language to cover something they didn't want found. I know what it sounds like. And I wrote down every word. What I want people to understand, and I mean really understand, not just nod along to, is that the outcome of this situation was not luck. It was not chance. It was not some mysterious force that decided to intervene on Simone's behalf. The outcome was the direct result of a series of decisions made by people who believed they could keep doing what they were doing without consequence. And the reason they believed that is because for 3 years there had been no consequence. Simone had been trained into silence. I had been pushed to the edges. The system had worked for them, until it didn't. The moment I sat down at that kitchen table and listened, really listened, without rushing her, without telling her what to think, something shifted, not because I said anything profound. I didn't. I just showed up and stayed. That's what Simone needed first, someone who would not be moved, someone whose presence said without words that she was worth showing up for. That is not a small thing. When a person has been systematically convinced that they are a burden, that their perception of reality is unreliable, that the people who love them are interfering, the simple act of someone sitting across from you and believing you can reorder something deep inside. The intelligence piece came after. The legal advocate, the documentation, the recorded calls, the financial disclosures, all of it mattered enormously. But none of it would have meant anything without Simone finding the nerve to walk out of that house on a Saturday afternoon with her grandmother's jewelry and her mother's photograph, and the quiet understanding that she was allowed to do this. That took something from her that no one gave her. She found it herself, underneath everything they had piled on top of it. I think about the plants on her balcony. That image stays with me. She picked them herself. She picked the apartment, the neighborhood, the therapist, the bank. She is rebuilding a life made entirely of her own decisions. And every single one of those decisions is an act of recovery. What I know after all of this is simple. The people who harm others quietly, behind closed doors, inside systems they've carefully constructed, they count on your silence. They count on your doubt. They count on you believing that showing up makes you the problem. The moment you stop believing that is the moment the whole thing starts to unravel, not through drama, not through confrontation for its own sake, but through steady, documented, deliberate presence that says, I see what is happening here, and I am not going anywhere. That is what I did for Simone. That is what my sister asked me to do. I kept my eye on her,